Thanks, Vasu and Dr. Manas, and thanks, Vasu and Dr. Hari Menon, who asked me to be a part of this ISMPOCon. I had other commitments, but thankfully they were non-overlapping, so I am here to. The topic that has been assigned to me is translating research into risk stratification for pediatric medulloblastoma. As we all know that pediatric medulloblastoma is the poster boy of pediatric neuro-oncology, and a lot has changed over time. So this is just a snapshot of the timeline of progress in medulloblastoma over the last 100 odd years, initially described as a different tumor from other types of brain tumors in 1910. The term was coined in 1925 by Cushy and Bailing, and now here we are in 2020, where it's very different what we used to know about medulloblastoma several decades ago. So the risk stratification in medulloblastoma, which has been prevalent since the last 2 decades, is generally been the average risk medulloblastoma versus the high risk medulloblastoma. And this has been defined by age at diagnosis, the status of residual tumor post-resection, and presence of metastasis, generally the leptomeningeal metastasis. So average risk disease is defined by age more than 3 years, residual tumor either none or less than 1.5 by 1.5 centimeters square, and absence of any metastasis. All 3 features need to be present to call it an average risk disease, while any single feature, which is age less than 3 years, residual tumor more than 1.5 centimeters square, or presence of any leptomeningeal or extraneuraxial metastasis makes it a high-risk medulloblastoma. Now, this risk stratification, which has been there for the last 20 years, is entirely clinical radiological, and this is based on the COG study that was published in 1999, where they showed, so this is the Kaplan-Meier curve showing the impact of age. So as you can clearly see, that younger children had a much worse outcome as opposed to older children. Also, children with a residual tumor which was more than 1.5 centimeters square had a worse event-free survival and overall survival as opposed to patients who had a smaller residual tumor. And metastasis M0 did much better as opposed to M plus disease. And as it was, I mean, M1 was better than M2 and M2 was better than M3. So this was published in JCO in 1999, and for the last nearly 2 decades has been what most people have been using, and most trials in the medulloblastoma have been done using this risk stratification up until today. Now, the question that one needs to ask is, age less than 3 years at initial diagnosis universally associated with poor survival outcomes? And the answer to that is possibly no, because this is data from Rutkowski's group from Germany, where they showed that this is all children less than 3 years of age. And as you can see, desmoplastic medulloblastoma has a fantastic outcome of more than 85% long-term survival, as opposed to classic medulloblastoma, which has only about 34% long-term survival. And this is all children less than 3 years of age, pediatric medulloblastoma. So this challenges the notion that age less than 3 years is universally associated with poor survival outcomes. So the infant medulloblastoma is actually a tale of 2 very different diseases. More than half of them are actually SHH pathway activated and have either desmoplastic or MBEN histology, which is quite favorable. Within the SHH subgroup now, recently the St. Jude's group has published 2 types of infant SHH medulloblastoma, one associated with an extremely good outcome, more than 90% long-term survival, the other not so favorable, only about 30 to 40% 5-year survival. So nearly half of the pediatric or infant medulloblastomas have the favorable biology SSH associated medulloblastoma, which has excellent outcomes with intensified chemotherapy alone. Whereas the remaining half, which is generally SHH negative and the bad biology SHH type, they are associated with poor prognosis. So age less than 3 years does not necessarily connote a poor prognosis in infantile medulloblastoma. The second question is, does the extent of resection really matter? And again, this is data from Germany, where you can see the 7-year EFS in R0 versus R+. There was actually no difference in outcomes. To say that extent of resection is really very, very prognostically important, this challenges that notion. So now, how do we refine our risk stratification, which was there for the last 20 years? And this we can do by incorporating histology and molecular biology into our risk stratification schema. Coming to histology, as we all know, typically medulloblastoma histology is divided classic, desmoplastic, and anaplastic. And from the German series, as well as from the COG studies in the United States, it was very clear that desmoplastic medulloblastoma had a much better outcome as opposed to anaplastic medulloblastoma. And even in the United States, the COG studies, the anaplasia, this is all presence of anaplasia, diffuse or focal, and this is no anaplasia. So anaplastic histology versus non-anaplastic histology, there was significant difference in outcome. And more recently, about 10 years ago, data published from Germany again. This is classic medulloblastoma versus the desmoplastic medulloblastoma versus the large cell anaplastic, and very clearly the large cell anaplastic does much worse as opposed to the desmoplastic medulloblastoma. So clearly there is an impact of histology on outcomes in pediatric medulloblastoma. Also, the favorable biology as defined by beta-catenin, nuclear beta-catenin staining. This is data from the SIOP-PNET3 study, where children who had nuclear beta-catenin accumulation did significantly better compared to patients who did not have beta-catenin positivity. And now we know that beta-catenin nuclear positivity is a surrogate for the Wnt pathway medulloblastoma, which is associated with the best outcomes in medulloblastoma. So we looked at histology, and now we come to the molecular biology, and this slide is a very common slide seen across all medulloblastoma presentations. So as we understand now, there are 4 major subgroups of medulloblastoma, and I'll not go into the details of this: the Wnt, the sonic hedgehog, the group 3, and the group 4. Within each of these subgroups, now there are more subtypes, and some people have demonstrated 7 subgroups, and the most recent demonstration has been of 12 subgroups of medulloblastoma. But broadly, the 4 subgroups, the Wnt, SHH, the group 3, and the group 4, have very distinct demographic profile, clinical features, genetics, as well as outcomes. Now, what has been the effect of these molecular subgrouping on outcomes? So in a large meta-analysis published a few years ago, more than 500 patients of medulloblastoma, it was clearly shown that the molecular subgroups were quite prognostic for all patients, for infant medulloblastoma, for pediatric medulloblastoma, as well as the adult medulloblastoma. So molecular subgrouping retained its significance in multivariate analysis, and it was relevant and important across all age groups. This was further corroborated by data from Indian institutions. So this is our own data published in Neuro-Oncology in 2013, where we showed that in a series of 100-odd medulloblastomas, of which 73 had information on outcomes, Wnt pathway was the best, whereas group 3 was the worst. Similar data from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Dr. Chitra Sarkar and group, where they showed that Wnt pathway medulloblastoma had the best outcomes and non-Wnt, non-SHH had the worst outcomes. So the molecular subgrouping relevance and prognostic impact has been demonstrated and corroborated by large data set from 2 Indian institutions as well. Suffice to say that given its importance, the WHO 2016 update actually incorporated the genetic classification of medulloblastoma in the WHO update. And now we have something known as a histomolecular classification, where you not only define the histology, but also look at the genetics of it. So medulloblastoma, which is Wnt activated, SHH activated, either TP53 mutant or TP53 wild type, and non-Wnt non-SHH group 3 or non-Wnt non-SHH group 4. And there are several ways to do this molecular subgrouping, and not that one is superior than the other. It depends on what sort of infrastructure and facility you have. You could use immunohistochemistry, where you could divide them into Wnt SHH and non-Wnt non-SHH, or you could use expression profiling at the RNA level using the nanostring or the microRNA, or a combination of the two. So we would not go into the details of this, but there are several platforms that can be used for molecular subgrouping of medulloblastoma in the clinic. These are not necessarily platforms to be used only in research laboratories. They were developed, most of them were developed in the research lab, but now they are available commercially and can be done in the clinic routinely. At TMH, we use a combination of the real-time RT-PCR of 12 protein coding genes and differential expression of 6 microRNAs using real-time RT-PCR, and it is introduced as a routine service since the last 3 years in the hospital. So when we incorporate histology and biology, previously I showed you that the average risk and high risk were only clinical radiological, but we can incorporate now histology and biology. And once we incorporate histology and biology, actually you can subdivide these risk groups into more tiers, and that is what has been proposed and accepted in the molecular era. I think one slide has gone missing probably. Anyway, in the molecular era, what is the impact of extent of resection? And this is data published, retrospective data published a few years ago, where it was shown that both progression-free survival and overall survival, the impact of extent of resection gets attenuated when you take the molecular subgrouping into account. So whether it is Wnt pathway medulloblastoma, whether it is sonic hedgehog pathway, whether it is group 3, only in group 4 medulloblastoma, if you see, there is a difference in progression-free survival between STR and GTR NTR. So this benefit is limited only to the subgroup 4 tumors. And what they actually concluded was that when we accounted for subgroup, molecular subgroup, the benefit in progression-free survival was found only for the subgroup 4 tumors. So in the molecular era, the value of the extent of resection gets further attenuated. Now, does the pattern of failure vary according to the molecular subgroup? And the answer to that is yes. The recurrence patterns are quite different across molecular subgroups. This is data from Vijay Ramaswamy and Mike Taylor's group. So predominantly there was local recurrence in SHH medulloblastoma compared to metastatic relapses in the group 3, group 4. And this was also corroborated by data from our own institute, where we saw that pediatric patients with SHH medulloblastoma failed differently as compared to adult medulloblastoma, and the adult SHH was mostly associated with local relapse, whereas the pediatric SHH was associated with a metastatic relapse. More recently, patterns of relapse have been published in Wnt pathway medulloblastoma, and very interestingly, this is an international consortium that has reported this outcomes, the patterns of relapse in Wnt activated medulloblastoma. And out of a cohort of 90 odd medulloblastomas, what they showed was that the ventricular system was actually the lateral ventricle, the frontal horn of the lateral ventricle was a preferred site of relapse in Wnt pathway medulloblastoma. And what they also demonstrated was that the cyclophosphamide-based chemotherapy was important. So children who received cyclophosphamide-based chemotherapy had less chance of relapse in Wnt pathway medulloblastoma as opposed to those who received non-cyclo-based, such as cisplatin and CCNU-based chemotherapy. So something to ponder, that cyclophosphamide or ifosfamide-based chemotherapy, high dose, is quite useful in Wnt pathway medulloblastoma, as on a multivariate analysis, it reduced the risk of relapse in Wnt pathway medulloblastoma. So in the molecular era, the risk stratification is now defined into 4 categories: the low risk subgroup, the standard risk or the average risk, the high risk, and the very high risk. And there's also an unknown category, which means that we really don't know the risk category. This is like Wnt pathway medulloblastoma with leptomeningeal metastasis at initial diagnosis. We really don't know which category they belong to because they're extremely rare phenomenon. So why this has been done is because the outcomes, the prognosis is vastly different. The low risk, by the low risk, in the low risk subgroup, you achieve more than 90% long-term survival. So like localized Wnt pathway medulloblastoma in children, which is less than 16 years of age. Even group 4 medulloblastoma with chromosome 11 loss or whole chromosome 17 gain fall in the low risk category. The standard risk is the most sort of common or the commonest subgroup within the 4 subgroups. So the 5-year survival varies between 75 to 90%. So it comprises of localized P53 wild type SHH, localized non-MYC amplified group 3, localized group 4, and localized group 4 without chromosome 11 loss or 17 gain. So quite a diverse group of medulloblastomas in the standard risk. The high risk, the survival is not as good, between 50 to 75% long-term survival. So metastatic group 4 and metastatic non-infant P53 wild type medulloblastomas comprise the high risk subgroup. And then there is this very high risk subgroup where the long-term survival is less than 50%. So the metastatic group 3 medulloblastomas and the P53 mutant SHH pathway medulloblastomas fall in this category. So now, from the earlier traditional clinico-radiological risk stratification system, we have moved to a clinico-molecular risk stratification system with difference in survival and prognosis. We all understand that there is a cost of cure in medulloblastoma in terms of clinical and social aspects, and overall there is reduced health-related quality of life in long-term survivors. And there is a need to optimize our adjuvant therapy and find the right balance, which is by maximizing efficacy and or minimizing toxicity. So you should reduce intensity of therapy in favorable biology disease to reduce the long-term sequelae, intensify therapy in unfavorable or poor biology disease to improve overall survival, and also target treatment to underlying specific genetic abnormality, such as in SHH pathway medulloblastoma, both to reduce the toxicity as well as improve survival. So contemporary risk stratification, which incorporates molecular biology, is therapeutically quite relevant for optimizing adjuvant therapy. This is from a workshop done in 2013, in 2016, where there was a consensus on designing next generation clinical trials in medulloblastoma. And what they broadly proposed was that the new generation of clinical trials should have the trials have to be molecularly informed and not as just based on histology of medulloblastoma. This is just a snapshot of the current medulloblastoma subgroup specific clinical trials, and we'll briefly discuss in some detail about a few of them. This is the pioneer or the first trial that incorporated risk stratification using molecular biology for assigning therapy in medulloblastoma. So they have a low risk, average risk. I'll come straight to the stratum. So it's a complicated stratum. So they define Wnt pathway, SHH pathway, and non-Wnt, non-SHH pathway. And within the Wnt, you have the Wnt stratum 1, which is the low risk, and the Wnt stratum 3, which is the high risk, where either there is a residual which is more than 1.5 or there is metastasis. And depending on the stratum, you give the dose of craniospinal. So the low risk receives 15 gray, the atypical Wnt stratum receives 23.4 gray, and the high risk Wnt receives 36 to 39.6 gray. Similarly, within SHH, you have stratum 1, which is the standard risk, and stratum 2, which is the high risk. And the dose of craniospinal is decided by the risk category. In the SHH, they have also added maintenance vismodegib SHH inhibitor in the St. Jude MB12 study. The non-Wnt non-SHH, the stratum N, again has standard risk, intermediate risk, and high risk. And in the intermediate and the high risk, there is high dose chemotherapy, and also incorporating pemetrexed and gemcitabine. So this was the first study. This is currently ongoing. The SIOP-PNET, the European group, actually also started a study where they have defined medulloblastoma now using molecular stratification into low risk biological profile or average risk biological profile. And in the low risk biological profile are the Wnt pathway medulloblastoma, where they are using a low dose craniospinal irradiation, 18 gray CSI and 54 gray tumor bed dose. In the low risk category, they are randomizing to 18 gray with or without carboplatin, and the intensity of maintenance chemotherapy has been reduced. This is a trial from Johns Hopkins where they looked at eliminating radiation therapy completely in Wnt pathway medulloblastoma and primary chemotherapy approach. The trial was actually terminated prematurely due to unacceptably high risk of relapses. This data was presented at the ISPNO meeting in 2019 or 2018. And clearly it showed that primary chemotherapy approach is associated with unacceptably high risk of relapses. At Tata, we had started a protocol for low-risk Wnt pathway medulloblastoma, where we had eliminated craniospinal irradiation and were giving only focal conformal radiotherapy followed by 6 cycles of CET chemotherapy. However, just like the primary chemotherapy approach, this trial also had to be terminated prematurely because of an unacceptably high risk of relapses. And now we have just got the approval for a successor study to this, where we have incorporated a low dose craniospinal 18 gray craniospinal irradiation for the low risk Wnt pathway medulloblastoma. So very clearly, both these trials, the primary chemotherapy approach and completely eliminating craniospinal irradiation, has demonstrated unacceptably high risk of relapses in Wnt pathway medulloblastoma, which are otherwise extremely curable. Coming to the last part, there are a lot of signaling pathways in medulloblastoma, and that can be targeted. And the most common agents that have been used are against the SHH pathway, the smooth end inhibitors, the PARP inhibitors, and also the HDAC inhibitors. As I said, SHH pathway has been targeted the most, and there are a couple of SHH inhibitors that are currently in advanced phase clinical trials. So just to summarize, this is a summary of the medulloblastoma demographics and molecular characteristics by molecular subgroup. And now, as I said, there are within each of these molecular subgroups, there are subgroups within them. So within the Wnt, you have the alpha and beta, 4 subgroups within the SHH, 3 subgroups within group 3, and 3 subgroups within group 4. Currently, most people would be content with the broad subgroups, which is Wnt, SHH, group 3, and group 4. The next generation of clinical trials takes into account this molecular risk stratification and de-escalation of therapy, as I said, for the low risk tumors such as the Wnt pathway tumors, escalation of treatment for the high risk and the very high risk, and targeted treatment for the SHH pathway medulloblastoma. I think I will stop here, and I'm happy to take questions, if any.
Thank you, Dr. Tejpal. That was a wonderful presentation on risk stratification of medulloblastoma. I think it's a complex topic and getting complex by every passing day when we have new and new information coming to us, and it is making things difficult for everyone. But I think, sticking to the first basic 4 groups is something that, we have to achieve as a pediatric oncologist or a radiation oncologist in India, to have that basic stratification available for everyone, and then only progress to, even a more advanced risk stratification. So my question to you is, sir, in India, where we are faced with challenges of risk stratifying every patient of medulloblastoma by the molecular methodology. What is the bare minimum we should do, and how do we achieve that in the bare minimum cost? Because we don't have everything available to us. These are very expensive tests. They are just available in a few centers. So how do we target to get the bare minimum possible to adequately risk stratify every child with medulloblastoma? If you can answer that, please.
Yeah, so thanks, Manas. I can't agree more. I mean, you can have 7 subgroups, you can have 12 subgroups. Maybe someday every individual medulloblastoma will be a group into himself or herself. But I think the broad classification, this WNT, the sonic hedgehog, the group 3 and the group 4, and even if someone says non-WNT, non-SH, I think that's even that is also okay in terms of broad molecular subgrouping. And I think to some extent, the WHO has made life easier in the sense that WHO now, the classification given by the WHO incorporates the genetics. And at the Indian Society of Neuro-Oncology, we published our guidelines for incorporating molecular subgrouping. And Dr. Chitra Sarkar and her group from AIIMS have demonstrated using the IHC panel. Now, 3 IHCs, beta-catenin, GAP1 and YAP1, they are sufficient to classify all medulloblastomas into 3 broad subgroups, which is the WNT pathway, the sonic hedgehog pathway, and the non-WNT, non-SHH pathway. Each of these immunohistochemistries costs close to 800 or 1000 rupees. So the molecular subgrouping can be achieved in 2,500 or 3,000 rupees. I think it's incumbent upon us, the clinicians, to ask for it from our pathologists. And I don't see any reason why such simple immunohistochemistry testing cannot be done in the vast majority of laboratories across the country. COVID times, we have established RT-PCR technique for innumerable laboratories, more than 1,500 laboratories across the country. Every single pathology laboratory now has immunohistochemistry technique available, and it's the clinicians. I think we, the neuro-oncology community, the neurosurgical community, has to ask for it mandatorily. Unless we ask for it, we will not get it. And I don't see any reason why it cannot be done in every center in the country which does pathology reporting using simple immunohistochemistry technique. If you are at a more evolved center, you could choose the platform as I showed. You could use the nanostring, you could use the gene expression profiling, you could use the TMH assay, but that is based on what your infrastructure and expertise is. But simple immunohistochemistry based can be done in any neuropathology or pathology laboratory that has access to IHC. So I think we should just ask for it, that we need this information. Without this, it is very difficult for us to know what the molecular subgroup is.
So, sir, that is about the IHC. My question is that to further risk stratify, to make sure that we are dealing with a high risk group or a low risk group, would you like to supplement it with NMIC and TP53 for every patient?
So at TMH, we routinely do a P53 IHC staining. We don't do the MYC amplification routinely unless it is a group 3 medulloblastoma. If it's a group 3 medulloblastoma, we don't use the IHC. So we get the group 3 and group 4 separately. So if it's a group 3 medulloblastoma, and on the molecular profiling itself, we get a signal whether there is a MYC expression is high or low. If the MYC expression is high, we would certainly want to do the amplification to know whether it's amplified or not. If the MYC expression is low on the molecular profiling, and that sort of suggests that it's unlikely to be amplified. So, I mean, that's done on a case-to-case basis. We don't do it routinely. But I think what I want to convey is that broadly, at least these 3 molecular subgroups should be done. And WNT, SHH, non-WNT, non-SHH. If you can get group 3 and group 4, that's great. But at least the non-WNT, non-SHH would be the minimum that you would want to get.
Thank you, sir. I can't see any questions in the chat box. Vasudev, would you like to
Yeah.
comment?
Yes. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to know what would be the role of radiogenomics in the sense incorporating radiology into predicting the various subtypes, and what is the concordance rate, and can it be used as a surrogate?
So that's a whole talk in itself. Actually, I'm scheduled to give that talk in the ISPN meeting just later this evening. So good question. Radiogenomics of medulloblastoma. Actually, we were amongst the first groups in the world to actually look at it in a systematic manner. And given the numbers that we have, we're able to actually show a reasonable concordance. The problem is that the radiogenomics, the validation of the radiogenomics is not so robust, and even in our sort of data of around 111 patients that we initially did the radiogenomics on, we were able to predict the SHH and group 4 quite reliably, more than 90% accuracy. But group 3 and the Wnt pathway was not that robust. It was, I think, the group 3 medulloblastoma was only around 65%. Wnt pathway was only at around 60%. So that kind of figure doesn't give you the confidence. I mean, you have to have an accuracy which is upwards of 90%. I mean, anything less than that, I don't think as a treating clinician you would be happy. There are two other groups that have subsequently published data using texture analysis and advanced radiomic features. They also have been able to identify the SHH and the group 4 much more reliably than the group 3 and the Wnt pathway. So I think radiomics is exciting, can certainly identify the SHH and the group 4 quite reliably, but we struggle, as of today, we struggle to identify reliably group 3 and Wnt pathway medulloblastoma. So I don't think in the near future, in the next 1 or 2 years, you could actually use just the radiomics for upfront molecular stratification and not pay cognizance to the molecular risk stratification.
Thank you, sir.
If there are no more questions, then I will end the session. Thank you so much, Dr. Tejpal Gupta, for that extremely comprehensive talk on molecular risk stratification. I'm sure we all learned a lot from that. And thank you, Dr. Manas and Dr. Vasudev Bhatt, for your valuable comments and chairing the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.